That's a 20-footer.
25. 3 tons on him.
In 1978, Robert Shaw pulled his car over in Ireland, stepped out, and dropped dead on the roadside. He was 51. The autopsy revealed something disturbing. Years of drinking had destroyed him from the inside. But Shaw's death was just the beginning. One actor choked on his own breath for months before dying. Another whispered, "Shark's back," in his final moment. A third said, "Shark got me after all," in a note found after his sudden collapse. The movie that made them famous seemed to follow them long after the cameras stopped rolling. Robert Shaw's USS Indianapolis speech in Jaws did not start as a clean, heroic moment. It started shaky because his drinking was already sitting in the room with everyone else. On the first day they tried to shoot it, he showed up after a heavy night, with people later saying he had gone through 2 bottles of vodka. He wanted to play Quint drunk because he thought it would feel more real. Steven Spielberg let him try. Then reality hit hard. Shaw was so far gone that crew members had to get him onto the boat and settle him into the chair. The takes kept falling apart. Lines slipped. Timing broke. The mood was there, but the control was not. So Spielberg shut it down and called it a wrap. And then the next morning came, and it changed everything. Shaw showed up sober. He apologized. He sat down again, and this time the words came out with a cold focus, the kind that makes a whole set go quiet. In just a few takes, he delivered the version the world now knows, the one that feels haunted without forcing it. What ended up on screen looked effortless, but the truth behind it was risky and messy, and it hung on the thin line between addiction and discipline. After Jaws, that same line kept following him. Some people close to him said he feared getting trapped as Quint, the hard-drinking hunter with a doomed edge. He was proud of the performance, but also shaken by how close it felt to his own life. That is the part audiences never see. A role can pay the bills and still leave bruises you cannot point to. Then, on August 28, 1978, the story ended fast. Robert Shaw was in Ireland, driving with his wife Virginia and their 20-month-old son Thomas near Tourmakeady in County Mayo, after finishing his final film, Avalanche Express. In the middle of that ordinary drive, he suddenly gasped, pulled over, stepped out, and collapsed by the roadside before he could make it back to his cottage. His wife ran to call for help. An ambulance arrived about 15 minutes later. By then, he was gone. He was 51. He was pronounced dead on arrival at Castlebar General Hospital. And later, he was cremated, with his ashes scattered near the cottage. People were shocked because it felt so sudden. But the years had been doing their work quietly. The autopsy story that followed was even darker. It pointed to alcoholic cardiomyopathy, where long-term heavy drinking weakens the heart until it cannot carry the load anymore. The details that get repeated are brutal, including claims that his heart had grown to 3 times its normal size, and that his daily drinking could reach 2 bottles of vodka. Even the jokes he made about pain could not soften what was happening. When the body starts warning you, denial can sound funny for a while. Then it stops being funny. And it was not only Shaw. Roy Scheider carried his own hidden fight, and he carried it in silence for a long time. In December 2004, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a blood cancer that attacks plasma cells in the bone marrow. It is the kind of illness that can sit inside you while you still look fine to the outside world, until it starts showing itself through symptoms that seem random. Dizziness, headaches, bleeding gums. The tests come back, and suddenly your life has a new calendar. He kept it private. Even people close to him did not fully know. Then, in June 2005, He went through a stem cell transplant at Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan, using his own harvested cells. The chemo was intense, and it left him weak, stripped down and exhausted. Still, he kept working. He kept showing up. He even talked about surviving on the Today Show and called each day a miracle. Because when you live inside a diagnosis like that, normal mornings start to feel rare. But cancer does not fight fair, and hospitals can be dangerous places too. In 2007, while he was being treated at the Myeloma Institute for Research and Therapy in Little Rock, Arkansas, he developed a staph infection that came through hospital tubes. A staph infection can turn fast. If it reaches the bloodstream, it can lead to sepsis, and sepsis can push the body into collapse. He was hospitalized for a long stretch, and reports say doctors tried experimental drugs when standard antibiotics were not enough. During that time, he flatlined twice. Imagine surviving the big disease, and then getting pulled under by something that starts small and invisible. Near the end, the numbers people repeat are painful. Blood draws every day, the body failing in slow motion. Claims that 80% of his plasma cells were no longer functioning, a sign the bone marrow was collapsing. And then there is that last line people say, he whispered, half joke and half grief. Brody should have won against that shark too. It sounds like a movie line, but it also sounds like a man trying to hold on to a piece of himself while everything else is slipping. After he died, there was another fight, this one in court. His estate filed a lawsuit against doctors, claiming key issues were missed, including problems involving his aorta. The case was later settled for more than $9 million. Even after the credits roll, some battles keep going, just in different rooms. Then there was Murray Hamilton, the man who played the mayor, the face of denial with a smile. Off-screen, his life was moving toward an ending he could not bargain with. In 1986, he filmed his last episodes of The Golden Girls while dealing with advanced lung cancer. People said he was so sick he coughed up blood off camera, then walked back in and delivered his lines clean. He looked thinner, he looked tired, but he stayed professional, and he kept working because work was what he knew. He was 63, and the cancer had been cutting him down for months. The smoking backstory was always there. Reports say he was a lifelong chain smoker, up to 3 packs a day for more than 40 years. Doctors told him the tumors matched the damage heavy smoking causes, and yet he kept smoking anyway. Addiction does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks like a man lighting another cigarette, even after the diagnosis is spoken out loud. Murray Hamilton died on September 1, 1986, in Washington, North Carolina, still only 63. Some accounts say he died mid-sentence while planning a cameo for Jaws 3. Others say he rejected chemotherapy because he wanted to keep working, even hiding oxygen tubes under costumes while filming The Last Days of Patton. There is also a haunting detail that gets repeated, that his body had become so emaciated he weighed about 90 pounds. Whether every detail lands exactly the same in every retelling or not, the picture is still clear. He worked until he could not. He held on until his body refused. And then the grief in Jaws that hits the audience hardest. The mother on the dock also had a real human story behind it. Lee Fiero played Mrs. Kintner, and in that scene, she slaps Chief Brody while her voice breaks. The story goes that those slaps were not fake. They were real, and the number people repeat is 17. Scheider took it. Again and again. Fiero used a loose wrist technique from acting training. But even with that, pain is pain. The moment felt so raw because she was not playing grief as an idea. She was pulling from a real wound because she had lost her own son years earlier. That is why the scene feels like it rips through the movie. It was not only performance, it was memory. Years passed, and she became something else on Martha's Vineyard. Not just a face from a famous film, but a teacher. Over decades, she mentored more than 1,000 children through the Island Theater Workshop, shaping kids who would grow up carrying her voice and her lessons. They did not know her as the grieving mother from a beach horror movie. They knew her as the woman who pushed them to be brave on stage. Then life moved her away from the place that felt like home. In 2017, she was moved from Martha's Vineyard to Ohio, so family could be closer. She did not want to go, according to people around her. Isolation and unfamiliar surroundings worsened her dementia. She missed the vineyard, and some say she even called it Shark Island, as if the movie followed her into real life. She kept repeating the line, "My boy is dead," not as a performance, but as a loop of grief and displacement. In April 2020, during the first terrifying wave of the pandemic, she was 91 and living in an assisted care facility in Ohio. COVID-19 spread through the place fast. Reports say she coded 3 times in less than 48 hours. She was put on a ventilator, and still she declined. She died on April 5, 2020. People close to the Vineyard community described the final days as lonely and confused, made worse by dementia and the isolation of that moment in history. But the love found her anyway. When word spread that she was sick, hundreds of former students and families recorded messages for her, and those videos were compiled and sent to Ohio. She watched them near the end and cried, because it reminded her that she mattered to a whole generation. After she died, her family donated her iconic Kintner dress to a museum. She left behind 5 children, 7 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren, and also 1,000 theater kids who still remember her voice. And then there is the opening scream of Jaws, the one that sets the tone before you even see anything in the water. Susan Backlinie did that. The story behind it is rough. For 3 days, she was pulled underwater by 2 teams of crew members yanking ropes attached to her harness from opposite sides of the beach, trying to mimic violent thrashing. They did not warn her when the pulls would come, so her screams were not carefully acted. They were real. She later described being yanked more than 20 times in a single day, bruising ribs and battering her body. Spielberg later talked about how dangerous the stunt was, and how the effect depended on perfect timing. Even rehearsals carried danger. The mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce, was famously unreliable, and there were mishaps that could turn scary fast. Backlinie had the water skill to survive it, because she had been an animal handler and a mermaid performer before the film. But close calls still leave marks. Some scars stayed visible on her body for the rest of her life, and she spoke about avoiding the ocean afterward because the sensation of being pulled by an unseen force never really left her. Then, on May 11, 2024, she died in her California home at 77. Reports say it was a sudden heart attack with no warning signs. She was found the next day by her daughter Dina after phone calls went unanswered. It is a quiet ending that feels strange when you remember the loud scream that made her famous. In the movie, the water takes her without warning. In real life, the moment also came without a signal. Chris Rebello grew up as the kid everyone on Martha's Vineyard knew from the screen, the boy who played Michael Brody in Jaws. After the film, he walked away from acting and chose a quiet, steady life instead. He stayed on the island, became an EMT and a firefighter, and turned into the kind of local who showed up when sirens sounded and people were scared. On November 30th, 2000, when he was 37, he went deer hunting with lifelong friends in the woods near Oak Bluffs. It was a normal day at first, just friends, cold air, and the sound of leaves under their boots. Then, without warning, Chris grabbed his chest and fell to the ground. His friends dropped everything and started CPR right there in the woods, pushing on his chest for nearly 20 minutes until medics arrived by helicopter. They did everything they could, but Chris was pronounced dead at the scene. Doctors called it a massive heart attack, which stunned everyone because there had been no warning signs and no family history that pointed to heart disease. The youngest main cast member of Jaws was suddenly gone, and the shock rippled through his town, his co-workers, and the fans who still watched his childhood face on screen. Only later did the full story come out. After his death, the autopsy revealed that Chris had been living with a rare congenital heart defect that no one had ever seen in routine exams. It had been with him since birth, quiet and hidden, waiting. People began to look back at his time on Jaws in a different light. During the famous canoe flip scene, he had to hold his breath, stay under stress, and repeat the action for the camera, all while his young heart carried a flaw no one knew about. Some experts later suggested that the strain of such scenes might have pressed on that weakness, but the defect stayed invisible for decades. His story became a reminder that even young athletic people can carry serious medical risks without feeling any warning at all, and it pushed more people to talk about heart screenings for kids who play sports or live physically demanding lives. The same night he died, the island still had a game to play. Just hours after Chris collapsed in the woods, the Martha's Vineyard High School football team, where he served as an assistant coach, went out to play in the state Super Bowl. The players were devastated, but they chose to play for him. They wore patches with the words "Rippy Mike Brody" on their jerseys, tying together the coach they knew and the kid from Jaws they had grown up watching. The stands were full of people who were not just there for football. They were there to grieve together. The high school even closed for a day so students and staff could attend his memorial service at Sacred Heart Parish. That game, and that shared mourning, cemented Chris's legacy on the island as a mentor, an athlete, and a quiet hero who had always stayed close to home. That choice to stay close was no accident. After Jaws, Chris turned his back on Hollywood. He preferred a small trailer, a tight circle of friends, his work as a firefighter, and his time with the kids he coached. Fame had come early and then moved on, but he did not chase it. When his family went through his trailer after his death, they found shark posters on the walls, silent proof that Jaws never really left his life. They also found a final note that stopped everyone who read it. It said, "Shark got me after all." The sentence felt dark and strange and eerily fitting. It tied his childhood role to his sudden death and showed that he still thought about that film and what it meant. His life traced a circle. He had been born on August 8, 1963, in Oak Bluffs, the very town where Jaws was filmed. He lived his entire life on Martha's Vineyard and died there on November 30th, 2000, at 37. He became the youngest main cast member of Jaws to pass away. For the island, his story felt complete and painful at the same time, a full-circle tragedy that belonged to their history. Another boy from the Jaws world carried his own long shadow. Mark Gilpin, who played Sean Brody in Jaws 2 in 1978, stepped away from child stardom and tried to build an ordinary adult life, but his story took a cruel turn decades later. In 2022, when he was 56, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, one of the most aggressive brain tumors known. The news hit his family hard, especially because relatives had already suffered from serious brain and nervous system illnesses. People began to whisper about a curse running through the family. The diagnosis came after Mark experienced seizures while he was helping plan a reunion event connected to Frasier, the series where his sister Perry had become famous. Doctors scanned his brain and found 2 tumors, one positioned deep in the central area where surgery was impossible. Even with chemotherapy, the tumor grew with frightening speed, swelling to the size of a golf ball in just weeks. The tragedy did not stop there. His sister April had died in 2017, and another sister, Patty, passed away in 2020, both after serious health struggles. Each loss added to the feeling that something dark was looping through the family story. The medical crisis dropped on top of problems that had already worn him down. After his early years as a child actor, Mark had faced waves of financial and personal trouble. He went through bankruptcies and divorces and tried to rebuild by teaching himself software engineering. For a while, he managed to create a stable life. But by 2022, he had lost his job and was at home, too sick to work. His wife, Kaki, an elementary school teacher, took leave from her job to care for him full-time. Money ran low. Their GoFundMe campaign laid everything bare, from unpaid medical bills to everyday living expenses that they no longer had the strength to cover. On July 29, 2023, Mark died in Dallas, surrounded by his family. In his final moments, he turned to his brother and said, "Shark's back." The words cut through everyone who heard them, because they tied his childhood role in Jaws 2 to the fight that was ending his life. After his death, Kaki wrote that their sons, Spencer and Presley, had been unbelievably strong during his illness, standing beside their father through each stage of treatment and decline. People who knew Mark began to look back at his time on Jaws 2 and connect details they had once brushed aside. The famous speedboat crash sequence, which thrilled audiences, had carried more real danger than many understood. During filming, Mark suffered a concussion in that scene. The injury was largely ignored once the cameras stopped rolling. He went on working, and no one treated the hit as something that might follow him for the rest of his life. Years later, when the brain tumor appeared, friends and fans wondered whether that old concussion and the strain that came with it had played a hidden part. There is no clear proof that the blow to his head and the later glioblastoma were linked, but the timing and the kind of injury gave the story a chilling edge. The tumor's rapid growth in his 50s, reaching golf ball size in weeks, served as a reminder of how long an unseen problem can sit quietly inside someone and then suddenly move fast. Even as his health slipped, Mark kept creating. In the months before he died, he drew a comic that startled everyone who saw it. It showed Sean Brody in a hospital bed, surrounded by sharks, a character facing the end while the creatures from his childhood work circled around. The drawing echoed his real life in a way that felt almost unreal. Friends and family called it haunting and even prophetic. That sketch became a kind of symbol for Mark, blending the young boy on the Jaws 2, set with the grown man facing a terminal illness. It showed that his mind kept returning to that film and that trauma, and it left one more piece of art for people to hold on to after he was gone. Behind these personal stories sits the man who started it all on the page. Peter Benchley wrote the 1974 novel Jaws, which went on to sell more than 20 million copies and gave birth to the blockbuster that changed summer movies. At first, the success seemed perfect. The book was everywhere, and the film that followed turned into a cultural tidal wave. Yet in the years that followed, something began to weigh on him. After the book and film spread around the world, shark populations fell sharply. People were afraid to swim. Fishermen killed sharks in huge numbers, convinced they were wiping out mindless killers that hunted humans. Benchley watched the numbers and heard the stories, and slowly realized that his fictional monster had helped create real harm. He later said in interviews that if he had known what scientists now know about shark behavior, he could never write that book in the same way again. He did not stop at regret. He became a shark conservationist, spent years diving with great white sharks for documentaries, and spoke in public about the need to protect the creatures his story had turned into villains. In 2002, he wrote Shark Trouble to explain what sharks are really like and to correct the fear his work had fueled. He even described his own novel as fish murder porn in his later writing, a harsh label for his own creation that showed how deeply the guilt had cut. Benchley did not just talk. He went into the water again and again. After Jaws, he learned to scuba dive seriously and traveled to oceans around the world to see sharks up close. He worked with groups that wanted to protect marine life and documented what he saw. Over time, his health began to fade. He developed idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a rare lung disease that scars the tissue until breathing becomes a struggle. Some doctors believed that a lifetime of diving, exposure to pollutants, and other environmental factors might have damaged his lungs. By the time he died in 2006, about 65% of his lung tissue was scarred. He spent his last days in his home in Princeton, New Jersey, slowly running out of breath. His wife, Wendy, later said that he choked at night, fighting for each breath. The image of him gasping in his final months sat uneasily beside the image of sharks, dragged from the water and left to suffocate. Friends and family could not ignore the parallel. His conservation work took him to places that deepened this sense of painful symmetry. Benchley traveled with groups such as Wild Aid and saw the results of shark finning with his own eyes. He walked past piles of fins and watched footage of animals dumped back into the sea without the parts they needed to swim or breathe properly. These trips struck him hard. While he spoke out against the practice and urged people to see sharks as vital parts of the ocean rather than monsters, his own lungs were failing. His nightly battle to breathe seemed to echo the suffering of the animals he was trying to defend. In his final years, he kept repeating that Jaws had been entirely fictional, and that real sharks were not the relentless man-eaters people imagined. When he lay dying in February 2006, Wendy said he offered a final apology, not to a person but to the ocean itself. He told her he was sorry for the damage his story had helped cause, and he hoped that his later work would, in some small way, balance the scales. His family carried the weight of that legacy. Benchley left 3 children behind, and they grew up in the long shadow of a book that brought their father fame and money, but also blame and regret. They sometimes spoke of feeling as if a Jaws curse hovered around them, not in a supernatural sense, but as the heavy awareness that one story could shape public behavior on such a huge scale. Benchley tried to leave something different for the next generation. His final book, Shark Life, aimed to teach young readers about the real dangers of the sea and the importance of respecting marine life rather than fearing it blindly. His story, from best-selling author to troubled conservationist, became a clear example of how fiction can spill into the real world, and how a creator can spend a lifetime trying to clean up after a story that went further than anyone expected. Other mysteries and rumors stacked on top of that. There were whispers of a cancer cluster among people linked to the film. Roy Scheider, who played Chief Brody, later developed multiple myeloma. Murray Hamilton, who played Mayor Vaughn, also fought cancer. And there were questions raised about health problems affecting others connected to the production. Some people on the island speculated that the way the production handled animal material and fake blood during filming had harmed the environment. Real shark blood and parts were used for certain scenes, and they worried that careless disposal into the local waters might have left toxins behind that spread slowly through the food chain. There has never been clear scientific proof that the filming and the cancers are connected, but the overlap in place and people kept the theory alive, adding another unsettling layer to the film's backstory. Over time, Spielberg found quiet ways to honor Robert Shaw in later releases and tributes. He adjusted certain edits so that the camera lingers a little longer on Quint's scars or on the wheel of the orca, small visual nods to the character and the man who played him. In interviews, he often returns to Quint's monologue about the USS Indianapolis, one of his favorite scenes in the film. That speech has its own story. On the first day they tried to shoot it, Shaw turned up drunk and struggled through the lines. Spielberg finally stopped the cameras, walked over, and hugged him, telling him he was great, just to help him save face. The next morning, Shaw called Spielberg and asked if he had ruined the scene. Spielberg reassured him, and they tried again. The second take is the one people know, the one that turned into a classic. Those little choices in the editing room became quiet tributes, ways of preserving Shaw's work with care. The emotional weight of those years did not leave Richard Dreyfuss either. Many years after the film, he sat on an Irish talk show and met Robert Shaw's granddaughter for the first time. The meeting brought everything back. Dreyfuss spoke about feeling guilty that he had not done more to support Shaw while they were working together, especially since Shaw died not long after the film's release. He remembered Shaw living near a lake in rural Ireland in his final days, and described him as a kind of roadside ghost in his memory, someone he passed but never really reached. The guilt stayed with him for decades, and eventually inspired him to work on The Book of Quint, his personal tribute to Shaw's life and to the character they created together. The Curse stories did not stop with the original cast. Roy Scheider's battle with multiple myeloma began in 2004. He chose aggressive treatment, including a stem cell transplant at Memorial Sloan Kettering in 2005, and later continued care at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences. He outlived the average survival time for the disease by nearly double, something he often described as a miracle. During his hospital stays and long recoveries, he kept a photo of Chief Brody by his bedside. The character who had faced his fear of the water and stood up to the shark became a kind of anchor for him. He told people that the role had given him a kind of courage he drew on when treatment grew hard. When he died in 2008 at 75, from complications of a staph infection that took hold because his immune system was worn down by therapy, that Brody photo was still near him, proof of how deeply one film can sink into a person's life. Another face from Jaws, Lee Fiero, carried her legacy in a different way. She played Mrs. Kintner, the grieving mother who slaps Chief Brody after her son is killed by the shark. That slap became one of the most remembered moments in the film, a clear burst of anger and pain. Off-screen, Lee spent more than 40 years teaching and mentoring young actors at the Island Theater Workshop on Martha's Vineyard. She was known as strict, demanding, and devoted, and she pushed her students to work harder than they thought they could. In 2020, she died at 91 from complications of COVID-19. During the pandemic, some nurses and healthcare workers began referring to her as the real Mrs. Kintner when they talked among themselves, seeing her slap as a symbol of the grief and frustration that families brought into hospital wards. Her life and death tied the film to a new kind of crisis, one centered not on sharks, but on disease and loss.